Good evening and welcome to the Education Idea Lab as part of the Reimagined Festival in celebration of the life and work of Sir Ken Robinson. The Education Idea Lab is a virtual series that's free and open to the public. These thought-leading events convene leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. And we are thrilled to be with all of you here tonight. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School and the logistics of the panel, and then we're going to hear from our incredible panel of experts. So Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school in North Haven, Connecticut. Here, education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. We embrace each child's curiosity and facilitate each child's learning journey within a student-centered program. Slate School's community promotes the love of the journey itself and through the exposure of diverse, enriching, and unique childhood experiences. It enables each child to discover and explore his or her own path. So at Slate School, we've also formed a community that is constantly striving to improve our practice, to create meaningful educational experience for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape in education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, just like today's, are free and open to the public. And we're so delighted to have all of you with us tonight. We have learners joining us from 6 continents. We invite you to submit additional questions as comments on Facebook, and we will select some of those questions to ask the panelists tonight as well. So we'll begin by asking each of our amazing panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their current role and maybe share something that they have learned from Sir Ken Robinson. So in alphabetical order, I'll begin with Eric Davis. Hi, Eric.
Hi, I was hoping you were going to go first name and Bobbi would jump out of the gate, but we're good.
I went by last names. What can I say?
Thanks for having us here. Already a pleasure to get to know the panelists a little bit pregame. So my name's Eric Davis. I am a career educator in some capacity or other. I've played just about every role in the system in my previous life, teacher, coach, counselor, built 4 education organizations in Chicago, for-profit and nonprofit, which kind of culminated in building an inquiry and project-based high school, where I think it was about 10 years ago we started, and we designed all inquiry and project-based curriculum aligned with the UN MDGs goals, now the SDGs, and we licensed that curriculum and then did professional development all over, public, charter, private. Now, and in the last 5 years, I've really focused all of my energy on learning design and helping people learn how to learn, as opposed to being moving through the individual roles and into kind of like senior management for a while. I don't wake to manage, I wake to figure out how to learn and how to do things better. And that's where I'm best, and it's where I'm the best part of a team too. And so now what I do is I do that, coaching and consulting with organizations, and then I'm a homeschool parent, which may emerge later in the conversation. And Sir Ken, thank you for asking to share on this topic. And I just rewatched a bunch of videos just to kind of rekindle the inspiration. I am grateful for, for his joy, his humor, his ability to recognize our failures and call them out in a disarming way where we're open and desiring to learn and to do it together. So thanks for, inviting me here.
Awesome, Eric. Great start. Thank you. And now just introduce everyone to Richard Gerver. Hi, Richard.
Hi, hello, everybody. It's an absolute honor to be with you all. This is an extraordinary privilege. So I'm going to start the other way around. I first met Sir Ken back in 2003 when I was a young school principal. I'd taken on a state elementary school in the UK that was considered to be so bad the government were going to close it down. And the only reason I got the job was because I was the only person in the community that didn't know that was the plan. Applied for the job, it's true. Applied for the job and got it because my ego moment of being a school principal lasted about 30 seconds because it was then I found out I had been the only applicant. Anyway, we went on an incredible journey, and that meant, because we were a failing school, we could throw the rule book out, and we reinvented education. And it was in 2003. I was about 18 months into my journey as a principal. I was asked to go and do a workshop at a big school principals conference in the UK. Sir Ken was giving the keynote, and I have to say, at that time, although I knew his work, he hadn't yet become Ted Ken, as I call him. So I wouldn't have known what he looked like. We've got to remember, it's not that long ago, really. We didn't have social media, and we didn't have so I stood at the back of the room listening to his big keynote. And frankly, the first thought was, oh my God, I've got to follow that and do a workshop, which you can imagine was terrifying. To which he came in, by the way, which made it even worse. He came into my workshop, and I was talking about what we were aspiring to do in our school. Anyway, by the end of the workshop, he came up to me after everyone left. We hugged, and he became my professional father that day. And I was incredibly proud, because until his passing, that's what he was. He was my guide. He was my inspiration. He would challenge me. He would question my judgment sometimes. He was ruthless in his pursuit of perfection for me. Anyway, I left my principal's job in 2007 because basically he told me to, and said, it's time for you to come out on the road with me. And so for the last 14, 15 years, I've spent my life writing and speaking around the world, not just as an advocate for education, but trying to help people understand the narrative link between education and life beyond education, really exploring human potential, creativity, and change, and human leadership. And so that's a little bit about me. So thank you very much for having me here. It's a joy and a privilege.
Wonderful, wonderful. Bobbi Macdonald, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. It's just a great way to spend an evening. And I think when I think of Sir Ken, I pulled out one quote that I love so much by him. And so I'll just read that because I think it relates to my journey that I went through. But he said, we have to recognize that human flourishing is not a mechanical process. It's an organic process. And you cannot predict the outcome of human development. All you can do, like a farmer, is create the conditions under which they will begin to flourish. And I just love that so much. And when I was a teacher, an early childhood teacher, that seemed like the only way to be in a classroom with little guys, is to think of it like farming and notice by looking very closely at what kids were doing. And that would change the teaching, and in terms of what they were figuring out. And I think years later, I had a chance. I also worked with Head Start families in Baltimore. And I feel like the thing that I got out of that experience was, in my journey, was love. I worked with families and we talked about literacy like a Thanksgiving dinner, and which part was the green beans and which part was the turkey and which part was the stuffing, and it was like just so much love and visible, explicit love. And the families like wrote letters to their children. And I thought, that's what school is all about. I really loved that. And so I'm going to skip ahead, but, having my own children and realizing that the school near my house, I didn't feel like I could impact that place. And I didn't feel like I could change it, even if I were a teacher there, even if I became the principal. And that night, Maryland passed the charter school law. And when I woke up the next day, we said, if you could have the best school you can imagine, what would it be? And then we just went about answering that question with anyone who wanted to come. And people showed up in the living room who wanted to do that work. And so my own kids grew up through those schools, and it was a community effort. And I feel like that was like the gardening we were doing together. And now currently I'm a doctoral student at the Harvard Graduate School of Ed, and I'm doing my residency at Education Reimagined. And they have a vision for school systems operating like ecosystems that are community-based, learner-centered, and really honoring and loving each child and thinking about liberation too. So happy to be here with all of you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bobbi. Now, hi, Wendy. Everyone, Wendy Ostroff.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. These conversations have just brought so much to my teaching and to my learning and to my parenting. So it's an incredible honor to be here with all of you. I'm a cognitive and developmental psychologist by training, and I've studied infants and toddlers and language development. I've also taught preschool at a Reggio Emilia preschool, and now I've done research at Max Planck Institute on cognition and on speech and language development. And now I'm in higher education teaching future teachers. I'm a professor at Sonoma State University and in a program called the Hutchins School of Liberal Studies, which is kind of a radical program started in the 60s. And it was, I like to sometimes call it the Slate School of Higher Ed, where we encourage our future teachers to be incredible thinkers and incredible readers and writers and questioners of all things and creative, curious learners. So working with people who are going to be teachers, and what inspires me in my daily work from Sir Ken is this concept of an invitation, of inviting my students to love to learn and inviting them to invite their students to love to learn, that we all have our element and our place that we can fit in this community of practice together, and that we need to find our own little niche, that we need to figure out how we fit. And so I think about cracking the nut, finding a student, and finding what's going to make that particular person love to learn. And it may be building on what Bobbi said, it may be now and it may be later, it may be planting seeds for later, but figuring out what that individual student needs has been my great passion, and hopefully passing that on to my students when they become teachers as well.
Beautiful.
So it's such an honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thanks for coming. And last but definitely not least, Keith Sawyer. Hi, Keith. How are you?
Hello, everyone. It is a real honor to be here with these brilliant colleagues, and maybe hard to go last. I am a researcher. I'm a professor at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and I study creativity and learning. And that's all based in my own creative practice going back for many decades now. I'm a jazz pianist, and more recently, an accordion player. That's my new instrument. And quite some time ago, while I was in graduate school in Chicago, I started playing piano with improvisational theater groups. And I ended up doing my research career on group improvisation and the importance of improvisationality to all social life, certainly to creativity, and more recently thinking about the improvisationality of teaching and teaching as an improvisational practice. The way I think about it is that it's a collaborative effort. So when I look at ensemble performance, like an improv theater group, or mostly in my case, a jazz ensemble, you're seeing an interactional dynamic among the performers. And in the classroom, you see that interactional dynamic between the teacher and among all of the students. So that's my guiding metaphor, is that you draw on other people and the interaction among everyone to generate some creative genius that's bigger and better than any one person could do.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I'm so excited, and now I'm completely intimidated and in awe of all of you. I thought I knew what I was getting into tonight, but I'm going to have to up my game. I'm going to go right back to you, Keith, and I'm going to get this started here. So I think Sir Ken said, and I'm going to read this so I don't get it wrong. So when we connect with our own energy, we're more open to the energy of other people. The more alive we feel, the more we can contribute to the lives of others. And that's just how this night seems to be starting, because I feel all of you in such a collaborative spirit, so ready to participate and ready to kind of move this forward. So for us here at Slate School, this brings to mind mentors and how mentors can work side by side with learners to really help that kind of foundational learning happen in a really safe spot. And I think Richard talked about Sir Ken is his mentor, and I think in some ways he's mentor to us all. So I'm wondering, how do we go about attracting mentors to support the learning in all stages of student growth? And I'm wondering if you've got some thoughts on that, Keith.
Right, that's a great question and a complex question.
Yeah.
I think of it as it's a paradox, right? It's the role of the teacher. You are, in a sense, an authority figure. I mean, you do have a responsibility. And in this case, as a mentor, you have a certain responsibility. And then there are others who want to interact with you and learn. But we want to avoid a situation where there's a sort of asymmetry or a power relationship. It's the same as what I see in the most creative classrooms. Uh, but it's a tough balancing act because you really do need to enable everyone, all of your students or your apprentice or whatever, you need to enable them to take an active role and be an equal participant in what's unfolding. At the same time, you do have that responsibility to provide guidance, or what's often called scaffolding in educational research. And I think of it as, I call it guided improvisation, where you're guiding the unfolding improvisation, the interaction between. So yeah, when I think of a mentoring relationship, I think of it as a dynamic. I think of it as interactional. Each person is contributing something. So it's not just the mentor, right? But you have to draw out what the others are bringing to the encounter and then figure out a way to improvise that collective phenomena that is a kind of group genius.
Awesome. Awesome. I love how you kind of highlight here that, that everybody brings something, everybody's bringing something different. I was thinking, Wendy, Sir Ken kind of called out those aptitude tests like the Myers-Briggs, for limiting the types of personalities to just 16, when he said every human has their own unique aptitude. And I think sometimes we perpetuate, in sort of subtle ways, by having having like cues like same here signals, where we're always talking about the commonality. But I mean, how do we as teachers, and how do we educate teachers to highlight and love this uniqueness in a way that really takes root in the hearts of our kids and in the hearts of our communities? And I think that's going to what Eric was talking about actually before we got on today. How do we get at that, Wendy? Do you have a thought?
Well, I'm thinking that we have to take a risk as a teacher, that we can't have our nice little plans and our nice little patterns and our kids in different boxes. And if they're this, I do this. I mean, I think that really speaks to what Keith was saying about improv. It really does feel like improv when real transformative learning is happening, because it's often what we didn't plan, right? That the most interesting thing pops out at us, and we have to be willing to switch gears in the middle to find that. And I guess on a bigger scope, it's the most interesting child that's not going to be the easiest child, right? I mean, everyone's a great, in the job interview when they say, which students do you work well with, and which students do you not work well with? I mean, everyone works well with the child who wants to do what you want, right? But the curious, experimental, unusual, divergent thinker, that's a tough nut to crack sometimes. And sometimes that child is not going to at all do what you want. So I think we really have to check our power and share our power in order to get away from those boxes that Sir Ken was talking about, to say, hey, why am I trying to put this person in a box? Because I want to predict and control. Because why? I mean, just to be vulnerable. I guess we really do need to be vulnerable, is sort of my thought on that.
Yeah. Wow. Definitely. I was thinking actually, how is it that Sir Ken's TED Talk is one of the most popular TED Talks ever? But when we talk about this type of education with people, even though it feels right to them, it also seems completely novel, like they've never heard it before, like it's brand new. Anybody want to take a go at that? I'm struck by the fact that we're having this conversation, and I think we've all probably had conversations like this one before, although not as great. But, why is it that everybody's listening, but it doesn't have the traction?
If it's all right, I'll kick off on that. I mean,
Great.
It's really interesting, right? I think we have to understand where the kind of vision for education came from in the first place: mass education, public education. And it was about preparing people to live in an industrial age, right? So it was all about preparing young people to seek out certainty. So what we were doing was we were putting them through filters and then saying to them, get your head down, practice learning to do what you're told, because you're going to end up in a job where basically you'll be paid and rewarded for doing what you're told as efficiently as possible. And so the education system was predicated and designed around that model. And I think what's really interesting is all of us, whether we've worked in education all our lives or just been students in an education system, have all experienced that to some degree. And to be fair, if you think about it, it's not just the formal education system, but obviously the majority of parents too, for the right reasons, will say, come on, son, come on, daughter, this is the route, this is where we're going, this is because I want the best for you, and the best of you lies in discovering certainty. And what's really interesting is we've known this for a long time, and this is what Ken was speaking to, but perversely, the last year and COVID has been an absolute accelerant and amplifier of exactly why that model isn't fit for purpose anymore, whether it even ever was. And so I think when Ken first gave his speech in 2006, and you've got to remember that Ken had been advocating that way for 40 years, you know, that moment in 2006 was the culmination of a 40-year career. And when he was talking that way, it was really resonant because people already realized the world was turning faster and in more uncertain ways. You know, we were on the cusp of the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008, which is really when people discovered that TED Talk. You know, it was during that financial crisis when all of a sudden the rule book had been thrown up in the air. So I think people increasingly from that moment were drawn to the message, and absolutely it resonated for them. But I think the problem was it's an alien land because so few people have experienced that kind of education, that kind of growth. And so there's an instinct that says, we know that's right. We know it's the way it's got to be. But very few people had adventured and stepped on the moon first in order to be able to help signpost the journey.
How do we get people comfortable with the uncertainty? It was my daughter who said, Mom, I've got to wallow in the complexity. Don't ask me that yet. I've got to wallow in the complexity. And she's my idol for that, because really, how I was shocked. How do we get people to wallow in the complexity and to be comfortable in that, in the uncertainty? Trust that things are going to be okay. Eric, go for it.
So thank you to all of you. There's 1,000 things I want to bring together, but I'm not gonna. I'm going to stay right here. So where you all are taking me right now, and if I'm looking away, it's because I write a lot of notes, not surprisingly, as we're having this conversation. And I'm really thinking in this last year about, and again, Richard, if you go back 10 years or 15 years now, whenever mental models and paradigms are shattered on a mass level, right, on a macro level, it seems like people, and we really see this now, they double down with a pre-existing belief, even though it's been proven that it's not practical or necessarily true, which complicates this whole thing about moving towards certainty on an existential level in all sorts of ways. And then there's the group who try something new. And if you really look at this last year, the opportunities, so you know the concept of crossing the chasm, right? So there's the early adopters in any idea, and then there's the rest who are like, you know, who are, I don't want to go, and then there's the pragmatists who go, and you get the late stragglers, et cetera. With COVID, suddenly everybody want to cross, but they still don't know how to do anything differently, finding themselves across. So now you find yourself in a new land, and you may not have the skills or the confidence or the habits or, you know, any of the other, or even just the context and opportunity. And then you have what was really going on emotionally, which is emergency situations and triage thinking. And what is powerful about that is we tend to what matters most, human beings who we love and care about. However, many people have still not moved beyond triage into long-term planning, designing for the era that we're now living in, whether or not they thought that was a decade out. So I think that we have to work with the different groups in very different ways. The ones who have doubled down, yeah, you all, Bobbi, hand off.
No, I want to build on that. I really do, because, and I think Sir Ken helped us recognize where we were. He showed us the industrial model that we were in the midst of. And then he lifted up and said, well, what kind of system wouldn't do that? And that's the part we're imagining now. And you're also pointing to the fact that it actually, there's evidence of it all around us. Schools like the Slate School and teachers who are being trained to really attend to human development, you know, and the kind of system that can recognize and cultivate thinking about mentorship, like, well, who are the people in a child's life that we could recognize are mentors, right? It's not, there's actually a lot of people. So expanding our definitions of what we mean by being connected to the community, you know, and really centering on knowing each child really well, and then saying, and it's important to be, you know, socially embedded. So what connections do we need for that child to grow up strong? And so now we're imagining a system that operates differently. And I would say is based on, instead of a mechanistic industrial guidance of principles, it's a living system. It's an ecosystem, you know, and all the parts are interrelated, and they need to be very dense and networked because they need to respond to each individual for what they really need. And you can't do that without knowing children really well. So you need the dense network like an ecosystem has. You need to create the environment for emergence. And that's when things are becoming. That's when a system's alive. And that's the unknown. And that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing for a system, a social system, to mess with, muck about in the complexity. Like your daughter said, she's strong.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
I think something, when we talk about mentors, and I think you were kind of getting toward this, and maybe it's just something that I'm in love with and want to talk about, so just bear with me, that you know, we elevate some careers, we elevate some pastimes, we say this is good and better, and I actually think that there is absolutely no career path, there is no pastime that can't be done artfully. That's not, you can be an artist, and the mailman is an artist, the you know, the grocery store worker, who we've all seen as being such an important part of our lives right now, a total hero, you know, they're artists. And I think that children recognize that better than adults. And I think it's why they love to go to the grocery store with their grandparents. Going to pick up the shoes from being repaired is an amazing event, because they're allowed to see the art in those pursuits. And I guess I just wonder, what does this labeling of some careers as better than others, what does that cost us as a society? Anybody want to take a go at that, Richard?
Sorry, I was just resonating in what you were saying and thinking about two experiences I've had that I think are really important, because again, even within those careers, even in the professions, the safe ones, the ones that are going to guarantee you success in whatever that was, I've had two experiences, one which was directly mine. Well, both actually. One, I remember talking to a lawyer once who said to me, you know the difference between a lawyer and a great lawyer? I said, what? He said, all lawyers know the law. He said, great lawyers know how to use the law creatively. So even in professions like that. And the other one is, a couple of years ago, I had the great privilege of interviewing a man called Barry Barish, who was the 2017 Nobel Prize winner for physics, for his work into gravitational waves. His research actually came out of Caltech. And I remember asking him, how did you go about recruiting a team that went on to win a Nobel Prize? Because I come from an arts background, so frankly, stuff like that blows my mind, right? But it was interesting because I remember Ken once saying to me, when he was talking to a professor of pure mathematics, and he said to a professor of pure mathematics, what are you looking for in a doctoral thesis of pure mathematics? And he said, the beauty of the proof. Anyway, poetic and beautiful. But he was this son, Barry Barish. So I said, what are you looking at? He said, well, first thing to know, Richard, is we had 3,500 serious applicants. I said, what do you mean qualified at for me? He said, these were people with at least 2 doctorates to their name each. These were world-class scientists and researchers. These were people at the time. And how many places, I said, did you have on your team? He said, eventually, incredibly well-funded team, 138 places, which from what I understand in a university context is pretty unbelievable. I said, how did you get from 3,500 to 138? He said, well, given the 3,500 were all geniuses, he said 2 caveats. The first was nobody made it onto my team if they only had science in their background, because that's useless to me. So I needed people that had arts, the humanity. I needed 3-dimensional people. And the second thing he said, which is one of the greatest things I've ever heard from anyone, particularly somebody as brilliant as him, was nobody made it onto my team that couldn't ask stupid questions. So in a way for me, Julie, we've got to reverse the concept, which is even within those good jobs and great professions, the truth is you listen to the exponents, the great people in those professions, and they'll say the same thing: creativity, flexibility. They want a multiplicity of aptitudes and disciplines. So actually we need to flip it and say, even in those professions, these are the qualities that we need to engender in our kids.
Keith, how do we do it? Oh, Wendy, go ahead. I was just sorry. Go ahead, Wendy.
I just want to kind of build on what you're saying, Richard. I find it so exciting, and I think that links to what we were saying before, is why do we have these early adopters, and why do we have people that are less willing to try something new? And there's some kind of a lack of trust there. And as you're talking about flipping it and knowing that children, as Julie says, are not making those judgment calls of which career is more interesting, or which day is more interesting, or which is more valuable to learn from. I'm just thinking about knowing the history and the research about children, just knowing that children, for instance, how robust they are as learners, that they're just born to learn. They're so good at it, right? We don't have to panic. I think a lot of our worrying of let's do this same model is because of this, what if they get left behind? What if they don't learn how to read, or, and they're never going to make it? And there's a very fear-based thread running through all these things we're doing. And if we can return, as Richard's saying, to that beautiful mind, that intricate creative mind, and we can trust that. We know all kids, most kids learn language, and even kids with all kinds of differences and neurodiversities, they learn language, but we don't ever teach language. So it's so robust. It's so in us, to learn a native language. This is one example. I mean, there's so many things that kids are better at than us. If we could trust that, then I think we would have so much more room to experiment and be early adopters and not be afraid.
Can I pick up
yeah.
on that?
Yeah,
Julie,
go ahead, Eric. Yes.
If you have other questions you want to move to, let's go.
No, you got it. You go. This is what I'm hoping for.
Okay, so the question was, how do we move people, right? And I'm listening to where the conversation's going, and I'm thinking about Bobbi, you said, in your local environment, you decided, how do we do the best school? And let's figure out how to do that. And I think I probably went through a similar experience, right? Building a school and creating it. It's an extraordinary experience, and it requires all of the skills. It's like, I was talking to somebody just yesterday, and they were like, so what are you doing? When's your, I don't remember exactly what the precise question was, but I remember my answer was, I haven't done a project entirely on my own in like 15 years now. Right? Everything that I've been a part of that's come into this world is a team project. That's it. There's nothing that isn't a team project anymore. And that doesn't mean I'm not independently skilled. I am uniquely skilled at what I do. And I am one part of a much larger ecosystem. And you used the word ecosystem before, so I'm going to just tie together a couple things. Whether it's mentors and building a whole ecosystem, and I said this on a previous conversation, Julie, the school is the first ecosystem we have control over. Right. So we want to connect with as many people as possible in as many different ways as possible, in person, virtual, et cetera. But when I think about like why people don't do this, I think there are wonderful people who work in schools who genuinely love the kids. They may not know how to do this. They may not be in an environment where the professional development from an administrative level and a district perspective is guiding them this way. They may lack the confidence and belief in doing it. They may feel pressure because of their performance appraisal contracts. I mean, like when I was doing professional development, I would walk in to teach inquiry project-based learning to educators who love our stuff. And they would literally say to me, this is in conflict with my performance appraisal. And like literally we're hired by the district. That's why we're there. And yet they don't feel safe even to do that. So, I mean, I think there's so many layers of it. And I want to take it to the most like individual. I am a parent. I am homeschooling my kids. Every day I have this potential conflict in myself. Are they developing their literacy and numeracy skills adequately? They're not in school. There's no benchmark. Me and my crazy choices, you know, how I adapt to their needs socially, emotionally, physically, intellectually, that's what's happening. And then I hear them and I hear their 15 hours of improv, Keith, and I hear the ensemble developing and how they're all playing their different roles in that ensemble. There is nothing I can do to facilitate that. I can only get in the way of that. So whether they're playing with Legos for hours or they're building forts or we're doing perspective drawings and I'm, you know, putting in these little, you used a great phrase, Keith, you know, I'm putting in these like little doses when I'm facilitating, you know, whatever it is. So I think we really have to pay better attention to kids, trust them to lead us, and believe in ourselves enough to stop controlling and rather to really contribute. So I hope that ties up those few threads.
I love that. I I think I think that's a great sum up. And now I guess my question is, how do we make that transparent? How do we share that in ways that people will move to that? Because I actually think we've done well. Maybe I should ask the question, you know, what if we did this well, what would this transformation in education mean? And I'm going to ask first, like, what would it mean to the whole world? Although I think we've done sort of a good job of expressing what that would be like. But what does it do locally too? Like, what can my neighbor expect from the world if kids are educated in this way for the next forever?
Well, good.
Keith, hit it.
Well, good. I'm going to start with Sir Ken and that famous keynote. I think the timing was great. I think what makes a good keynote is someone tells you something you already believe, right? Or that you already feel, but you don't know how to put it in words yet. So you have a receptive audience, but you're giving people a language to talk about it. Now, if you're involved in education, and especially if you're an arts educator, you know that deeply, the power of creativity for learning and development in children. So the teachers got it with the talk. But at the same time, there was a new audience, right? There were the business leaders and the political leaders from the 1990s talking about the shift in the global economy to a knowledge economy. And then by 2000 and the early 2000s, the innovation age. So this keynote came at a time when it brought together arts educators and teachers with the business and political leadership in a way that had never happened before. So there was a real opportunity to accomplish change in how we teach, to move away from, as Richard described it, this rote memorization, industrial age type of education, which still was going on 100 years later, right, in 2000. So there was a real opportunity to bring together those politicians and business leaders who you don't normally think of as being focused on fulfillment and learning and creativity. And then the teachers who've known how to think that way the whole time. So then here we are 15 years later, right? And we haven't gotten to the future, right? We're not in utopia yet. And what I've learned from that is that it's very hard. We all know it. We all know it where we need to go. And it's not really any one of us that's not doing what we need to do. There's systems in place and cultures in place. So what I wrote in my most recent book, I know it's not teachers. I mean, we can do teacher professional development, and I do it, and it helps teachers do in a way what they already know in their hearts how to do. But then there are the institutions and structures of schooling, the mass assessment practices. There are expectations among parents and school leaders, and there is actually a role played by parents and students. They're comfortable with the old style of teaching. People like certainty. People get stressed in the presence of uncertainty and ambiguity. That's a common psychological finding, right? You get anxious when things are uncertain. So it's difficult for people to go through this transformation to become creative and active learners. And students need support in doing that. Parents need to also be supported. And your child might not get that top mark in the spring, but these other things will happen. It's really a matter of trust in the presence of uncertainty, and that's really about societal and personal growth, I think.
I'll go. It's all right, Julie.
Yeah, Bobbi.
I really love your thinking on that, Keith, a lot. And it makes me think about, we're missing folks. I'm really happy about the public anti-racist commitments that businesses and schools and communities are making, because they're making their learning visible. They're putting out, here's what we're thinking, here's what we're learning, and it's like a courageous stand to show that you're learning something. And I think if we want to create different kinds of systems, we have to be really vocal and share what we're learning and what we're figuring out. And one of the reasons I love that is because Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And I'm hoping that we're going to talk about love at some point tonight, because I think we need to like blatantly and explicitly talk about, love and education. It's the foundation of the whole thing, is wanting for your own children and for other people's children. And so I just want to talk about that a little bit and just, bring that forward. And then we just need to imagine, systems that operate and be different. And there's some great work going on around that. And so we need to highlight that and illuminate it and talk about it. And that's exciting. So
that is exciting. That is exciting. And I think you're right. I mean, I do think it's love. I think everybody is on this panel tonight for that exact reason. And I think, honestly, most educators become educators for that reason. Because, Eric, go.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to jump after.
No, please.
So I want to put I want to give like a tool that teachers or educators understand what love can look like in a rubric, right? What does love look like in a rubric? So our school, the one we wound up building in Chicago, our values were autonomy, accountability, purpose, gratitude, and through these things you demonstrate achievement. And I think about it as the body, like, your arms are balancing autonomy, because it's a high school, so kids are like, they want to be autonomous, right? But that balances with accountability. You have a sense of purpose, like that's what's moving you forward, and you should, rooted in gratitude, ideally, you're rooted in gratitude. Through all of this, you demonstrate your achievement, right? That's what comes out. That's what but most often people look at achievement and they forget about all the other stuff, right? Well, love is about those other things. Love is about the human being who demonstrates increasing competency, and that's what empowers them to feel and give more love, because they feel better about themselves. They're able to contribute and be part of a community, whether it's helping set a table or being able to solve complex problems, right? Those are all varying degrees of being a part of something and contributing to it. And when I think about like a rubric, well, how do we systematize that into grading, right? We had like, we loved rubrics. So one of the things we did, and I'll be specific on this, was we thought about like, what's the essence of this thing at this moment, a snapshot in time. So we always ask, like, what problems are you solving, as opposed to what standard are you demonstrating knowledge of, or, whatever, because we felt, again, it had to be practical and relevant. So we had a couple little guidelines for ourselves in rubrics. One was like, it has to be visually attractive. Like, keep it simple. It's not 40 squares. It's not 40 boxes. It's something on one page, nice and simple. It's not intimidating. Like simple. Second thing is yin yang. Something's open, something's closed. If the format is open, the content is more closed, more restricted. You got to stay within these content guidelines. If the format is closed, it has to be a 3-minute video, blah, blah, blah. Then the content is wide open. Pursue the thing that's most interesting to you. It has to serve multiple intelligences. If we're solving problems, we're bringing multiple intelligences to it, and ideally both sides of the brain, and with some level of equality, or in that balance. And then there has to be some standard, whether that standard is about a Common Core standard, or a state standard, or a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal standard, or a standard of excellence in this one unique location in the world. And then it should also reinforce one of the core values of the school and the reason that the school exists. So that was the way that we literally built that into every rubric, and we use that to hold ourselves accountable as educators. If we're asking our students to do something, and it's going to be an artifact of learning, therefore it has to fit these conditions. And that was an accountability measure, which allowed us to do a better job of literally showing love in a practical way.
How do we empower teachers to do that when right now they're being taught how to use a box?
All you.
For me, a lot of what we're talking to comes down to a couple of things, really. The traditional modus of an assumption of incompetence, and so many of our teachers are used to being managed under an assumption of incompetence.
Yes.
In other words, we have to prove our value, we have to prove our worth, and therefore all of those systems of judgments are put in place that way. And also, of course, that's predicated on so many policymakers assume the same thing about our kids, right? That they're incompetent, that they'll only learn if they're made to, that if they're bribed to, that if they're rewarded to. And of course, what we all know is people thrive, organizations thrive when they are under an assumption of excellence rather than an assumption of incompetence. So the first thing is this: we have to create a culture in our profession where there is assumed excellence, because we've talked so much about love and teachers, and the truth is 99.9% of the teachers I meet have passion and instinct and desire to do things in different ways. And they have the skill set to do it, by the way, right? The problem is they just feel fearful that if they do it that way, they're going to get it wrong. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk about, that we've also got to shift teachers' perception away from this idea that they're successful if kids keep getting stuff right. Because the one thing we all know as educators is you learn nothing new by getting something right? You only ever learn something new at the point of a mistake or the realization that you don't know something, you can't do something. Now, teachers are really good at encouraging kids to behave that way. We're not so good at encouraging ourselves to think that way. And I think we have to free up teachers' confidence to say, it's okay to go out there and make a mistake. And actually the professionalism comes from, what have I learned from that process? Where am I evolving, and how am I developing? And if I may, the final thing I'd say is this: I often describe this whole thing around, take a classroom with a teacher and kids, right? The kids come in, imagine the teacher's a croupier in a casino. And actually every day when kids come into your classroom, right, you are asking them to gamble their resilience and self-esteem with you. And each kid comes in with a different number of poker chips, right? And you roll the ball and you spin the wheel on the roulette table. And you're saying, come on then, gamble some self-esteem. And you've got some kids, the high rollers, right? They've got hundreds of poker chips. They'll slap poker chips on red or black or odd or even individual numbers, because it doesn't matter if they get it wrong. They've got loads left, right? And other kids come in every day, and they're the ones that lurk in the shadows because they're looking at the game and they want to play. They desperately want to play, but they've only got one poker chip of self-esteem. So they stand back. And to an extent, as well as thinking of our kids that way, we've got to think of our teachers that way. These are incredibly passionate, loving, professional people. But every day they go to work, there are very few with loads of poker chips and an awful lot playing with one or two poker chips. And I think for me, it's why events like this are so important. But more importantly than that, there are spectacular things going on out there. Being played, the game is being played by teachers with loads of poker chips. And we've got to get those people to tell their story, because the more they tell the story of what they're doing and their creativity and their success and their assumption of excellence, the more the poker chips will grow in those teachers lurking in the shadows. And that maybe is how we transform the system.
And what we teach our kids by making an obvious, mistake, right? Like being transparent about that as teachers, cashing in those chips and saying, hey, look, I really blew that. That empowers the kids too. So Wendy, I know you've got something. I see you
I
nodding
was
like
just
crazy.
gonna say, really, I want to riff on what Richard's saying also, and others, is that it's freedom. It's academic freedom. Is that we need. I mean, we have academic freedom in higher ed, and preschool teachers have academic freedom, but K through 12 teachers who have ostensibly the most training in how to be teachers have the least academic freedom. And so, and oftentimes they're boxed in. I train future teachers who are wildly passionate and excited and thrilled, and then they get squashed down as soon as they get their first job and they realize that they can't do any of those things that they've dreamed of doing. I think if we just shifted it to be teacher scholars, we're experimenting. This is all an experiment. Like, go in, here's what I'm going to try. Here's what I'm going to do. We have communities of practice. We share that. We get together and we say, all right, here's what I'm going to try. What are you going to try? Like, set a goal, try something crazy. Here's a big reach for me. I mean, I've blown it on whole semesters. I've had courses do horribly tank. And I've learned so much out of those semesters of my students. And, it really was a bad one, but we can actually talk about it, and we can actually be vulnerable together. And I can say, God, I blew it. And then you're going to facilitate next week. Like, what are you going to do? Or I always feel like that with that, back to the hard nuts to crack. When I have a hard nut to crack and a student that I can't get engaged, I feel like give them power. I give them power. Like, it's all up to you. What we're doing next week, it's all you, whatever you want. We can do anything. And then suddenly, power, we need to be empowered. I think as teacher learners, we're experimenting, we're playful. Back to Bobbi, why aren't we, teachers need to be playful, just like students need to be playful. So it seems that everyone's pretending that they're doing a good job because our jobs are at stake. But as soon as we finally let down and say, yeah, let's be a community of practice. Let's share. Let's do an experiment. Scholarship of teaching and learning. Let's design an experiment here. I want to try something totally crazy. I'm not going to give any grades at all. When my principal supports me, then let's see. Guess what? The motivation is going to go way up. Intrinsic motivation, right? Let's try it. And so I think we could tweak the teacher training, but also just academic freedom. I'm surprised academic freedom isn't more of a thing that teachers are rallying for. It's just been so squashed out. I mean, to have academic freedom is, I think, at the crux of being a great teacher.
It feels like Keith could talk about this, because it feels like a lot of the things that you were saying, I just kept saying in my mind, yes, and the old improv bit, where yeah, we want that and we want more. I'll take what you're giving me and I'll add this. Keith,
Right, yeah. And I was thinking professional autonomy, but autonomy in the context of the community of practice. All of my research on innovation comes down to groups and communities, a form of what I call distributed creativity. So when you see innovation anywhere, in any sector, any organization, the innovation emerges from lots of different people having ideas and making contributions. And it is that yes, and it's improvisational, and it could be on a very large scale. Improvisation in an entire school district, what you might call distributed leadership sometimes, distributing the leadership of the institution to the community of educators. So what I see innovation emerging from everyone contributing. So you have to have those dialogues with other teachers. I've been advocating all sorts of structural changes that would foster that kind of collaborative emergence where teachers can interact in new and different kinds of ways, whether it's across grades or across subject areas. It's time consuming. It's hard to do when your day is full already. I do think the demands on teachers that we have now have to be released a little bit so that they have that freedom to contribute to this improvisational development of new innovations, right? You can't ask the community of practice of teachers to start running the school themselves if they're already spending 10 hours a day teaching the students. So yeah, I think there needs to be some shifting, but it's going to result in organizational change if you release the community of practice of the teachers to work together and collectively generate something that emerges. And that's where we're going to get to cultural and institutional change in schools. It's going to come from the teachers.
I want to just quote Sir Ken here. You may not know what all of your aptitudes are because you may never have called on some of them. They lie latent and undiscovered with you. Whether you discover them depends to some extent on opportunity. If you open yourself to new experiences, the odds improve exponentially of one of those experiences changing your world in a profoundly positive way. And I had this question written, this quote here about kids. And what it comes down to tonight is that question is for everybody. You know, we think that, you know, learning is just for, you know, K to 12 and beyond, but we're all in this. And to some extent, this quote is meaningful for everybody on this panel, everybody everywhere, because there's always something new that could move you. But I wonder how we can do more of this for ourselves and model it for our kids, and how we can then in turn be empowered to offer those experiences to our students. How do we offer those experiences to kids? What are some ways? Just some, we've got a few minutes left. What are some ways to offer that kind of immersion to kids? Let's go out with some ideas here.
Yeah, I'll
Eric,
jump
yeah.
in here. I'll jump in on some practical ideas. So like, that's why I suggested the rubric idea, because that's something that people don't think about all the time, but it's actually like where the rubber hits the road. So I think you guys were, the key one you're just talking about is this idea of freedom. I mean, we all know the power of choice matters, right? You, in any opportunity, invite kids to play different roles. Like there's 1,000 roles you play in the course of a day. They don't have to be done by teachers. They shouldn't be done by teachers. So, you know, it's inviting kids to play all the roles in the world, in the ecosystem, and giving them a lot of choice, because only when they demonstrate choice can they actually understand consequences. No kid feels responsible when they're not existentially, when they're told what to do all the time. And we don't need to teach passivity. We need to teach, you know, civic engagement. So those are just a couple of basic things from me. I want to hear from the rest.
Yeah, Richard, yes.
Now, I mean, two things really for me to close on. The first thing is this: Ken and I used to talk a lot about legacy, his legacy, what he was going to leave behind. And when he passed, I remember thinking to myself, what tiny bit of the torch can I hold on to? And I remember the time I saw the greatest glint in Ken's eye was when he used to get people round a table from disparate backgrounds, people who'd never met each other, who would possibly never meet if it hadn't have been for his reach and his power of his network. And then he'd sit back at the table and just watch magic happen, because it was the power of connecting people who would never normally connect, right? And I think for me, it's one of those things we have to do more of with our children. We have to move away from this modus and belief that school is a place you go to where children get educated by teachers. And actually what we need to do is broaden the horizons. We need to get our teachers, but more importantly, our children connected to the incredible opportunities out there. And we need to go back to that old African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. We need to get the whole village involved, and we need to be less precious about believing schools are a place where only teachers function. And that's what we need to be more of, is a hub And we need to attract and bring people from the whole community in to broaden the horizons and opportunities for our children. And I've seen schools do that brilliantly. And where schools do that, you see an absolute explosion in aspiration and dreams from young people. And that changes the energy completely.
Beautiful. We say school is wherever you are. Bobbi, I see you nodding. Do you have something you'd like to say?
I really enjoyed that, Richard.
Beautiful.
I think that when I was describing the ecosystem before, I really resonate with that. I think we can shift that the student, it's rather than the school building, the student becomes the place that is generating based on their interests and their passions, and let the system then be created around that. And when we do that, you know, the nice thing about it is we need young people right now. We need their creativity, their thinking, their wonderful, huge, wide vocabulary for being alive, even for what gender you can be. We've got so many choices now. It's amazing. You know, we need that kind of thinking to handle the complexity. So by shifting into that ecosystem approach, and we raise the standard of children in the community and let them do real work with us. We need them. And so, and you can just ask them where they want to start, and then support them and let them go to it. I've seen kids do such amazing work, and I'm excited about the possibility of, you know, creating an environment where they can thrive and do that with us.
So I think we're actually over time, but I think we could go on for a long time, and I think we ought to actually right now pen into our calendars 10 years from now, when everything that we hope for is actually happening. Because I think that we have to actually have an end point in mind. We have to have a goal, something out there that we're working toward. We need a little bit of my daughter, another brilliant thing from my daughter today was a little GPS, Mom. You need a little GPS. You want to know where you're going. And I really do hope that we can come back together and have a celebratory Education Idea Lab when we talk about imagine how it was, and this is what we have. So thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists. I feel incredibly honored that you were here. I'm delighted to see all of you, and I'm grateful to all of the people who tuned in tonight and who will tune in subsequently. The Education Idea Lab ends every time the same way. The students of Slate School, at the conclusion of every meeting, we say positive rice. Sending positive rice to all of you, all of the panel, and everybody out there. Positive rice, and let's keep imagining if. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.